My understanding is, I suspect that most of you do know quite a lot about the facility, but usually we just like to kind of do a brief summary. I think, as most of you know, I also wanted to mention in the table, which we moved from the back wall around the corner. I'm sure people found it now so we can fit some more chairs. There are several handouts that describe not only the Energy Facility Siting Council siting process, but also like a public participation handout that helps describe at what points you can participate. Obviously, this is one of them. What we're talking about today is the Brush Canyon Wind Power Facility. It's proposed on about 76,000 acres of private land. It's going to generate up to 535 megawatts of energy using up to 223 turbines. Sometimes that sounds a little vague to people, but often at this point in the process, an applicant has not actually selected a turbine. So how this process works is generally we kind of look at what the worst case would be. So if we're looking at what kind of noise it would generate, essentially the applicant gives us, this is what the worst case would be. If they change, and ultimately if they would change something that could affect that, they would have to come back in for an amendment to their site certificate if they're granted the site certificate. So along with any wind power facilities, along with the turbines, which are usually the most visible structures, there's a lot of other structures associated with these, including in this case a 230 kilovolt transmission line that's 32 miles long. It runs north to south, or I guess it would be more south to north in this case, and then cuts west over to the Buckley substation that I mentioned earlier. It also takes a lot of access roads. This facility has proposed up to 95 miles of new access roads. I'd like to clarify for folks is a lot of what we're calling new roads are actually existing roads that will be improved, but for the purposes of assessing impacts, the applicant assumed that all roads would be new roads, which is kind of the most conservative estimate of the impacts. Along with these facilities comes what they call collector lines, which are 34 kilovolt, much lower voltage lines. Most of those are going to go underground. Most of those will not be visible. They will be placed underground. There's also what they call an operations and maintenance building where the facility is controlled from. In this case, there will only be one facility. There will also be two substations, or I shouldn't call them substations, small substations that will feed into that will ultimately go into the 230 kV line. There's also meteorological towers. I can't recall off the top of my head how many. I believe 10 is coming to mind, up to 10 meteorological towers that will stay in the area. And then, of course, during construction, there'll be temporary construction areas, not only staging areas. For example, with the roads and the turbine strings, as they construct those, they build fairly wide, like 40-foot wide crane paths to be able to get everything constructed. At the end of construction, most of that area is restored and the roads are reduced down to usually 18 to 20 foot width, depending on what the road is feeding. And then they're maintained that way throughout the life of the project. I think that pretty much, that would be a rough description of the facility.
Thank you, Sue. So with that, we'll commence again with the testimony. And Charlotte, are you going to go around and hand people the microphones? Is that the way you're going to do it?
If they would prefer.
Why don't we try and see how that works? John Silvertooth Stewart is the next card I have. Mr. Silvertooth Stewart, when you get the microphone, if you wouldn't mind, identify yourself for the record and give us your address so that we make sure we've got that for the record.
I'm glad to meet you. Dan's been emailing me a lot. Same thing. Same thing. Left hand and right hand equal.
Hi, my name is John Silvertooth Stewart. It's 4547 Main Street. I'd like to welcome the state to, I don't think we've had a full long stay.
Louder, John.
Is that better?
Yes.
I always get accused of mumbling, so I better keep it close. I was going to say, I don't think we've had a full-blown state hearing out here since superintendent of public instruction came out and handed this school over to a dangerous mind control cult, so I hope we do better this year. I'd submitted a lot of written comments, and I'm not going to read them. I'd submitted another comment tonight, not a comment really, but one of the comments that I submitted earlier, they had the links to websites, and I printed those pages out, is what that testimony is, so, and printed right there. So I don't really need to read my comments. I know they say the hearings officer, but mostly that's really the reading officer.
I serve both purposes.
Yeah, so I'll just let you look at the comments. There's one area that I would like to mention separately, and that is the question of the adequacy of Highway 218 from the top of the hill up here, Adams Canyon, and then Union Street that runs through Antelope here, which is proposed to carry a heavy load of construction traffic. There's a couple of different numbers in the graphs, and I was never really able to figure out which one is which. But at the low end of it, it was, I think, I don't have my notes in front of me, but I think it was a 580% increase in traffic, going from about 90 to, I think, 610 or something like that. You can see the numbers. I think we figured out that during the hours of operation that would be some form of construction traffic. I presume the heavy construction load from the gravel quarry is a heavy portion of that, about every minute and a half. People here in town, most of us live along Main Street, and there are many that, while they're not directly on Main Street, they're 100 feet away from Main Street. And this is going to cause a serious impact. It's really something I think that most people would realize is not really acceptable. And I'd like to think that we could find a solution that would resolve that issue. We suggested a bypass road, that Neon be able to construct a bypass road from their towers up on top down to the gravel quarry area, and then over to the highway, and cut out all the problems that we would have. Now, in addition to the problems directly relating to our livability here, I mean, we have seniors, people with limited mobility, pets. We have no sidewalks. We have no traffic enforcement. We have no hope of getting any of that. The county and the state police are stretched too thin to help us. The other thing we have here is really all year, obviously heavier in the summer, a lot of tourist use of this road. We have from the top of Adams Canyon up here on 219 coming through town a lot of motorcycle and bicyclist tours. These are well-recognized, internationally known routes. And the motorcyclists, most of them are good people, but you know, they all kind of come out here to speed, and some of them are pretty dangerous. And that's an issue down here in town. People stop. The proposed route down Union Street goes by our little pocket park and by our community church. And we have people sitting, picnicking with their dogs. The church is a tourist attraction. And there are people there, whether there's service in progress or not. The people stop on the road out here. It looks inviting. I think it's a place to have a little picnic, and I guess it is. This fall we have the Porsche Club sitting out here for a good part of the afternoon. Young Life, which is the Christian Washington Family Youth Camp out at what used to be the Rogers Quorum at the Muddy Ranch.